Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and this is a daily video blog for December 19th, 2017. Today, I'm going to be talking about Saturn entering its home sign of Capricorn. It happens tonight on the East Coast, pretty late, almost near midnight. If you're on the West Coast, a little earlier in the evening. It's a pretty exciting moment. We've been talking about getting ready for Saturn entering Capricorn for a while now. I've done a few video blogs on it. I wanted to add a few final thoughts to this transit before it comes through. So let me see here. Got my notes down, and a few things that I want to say actually sort of in the preliminary. So a lot of people read my daily columns, which I write and publish to a lot of people around the world. And I've been getting a lot of feedback from people essentially saying, basically, really mixed, right? I love your video blog. I'm so happy you're doing some videos. This is so cool. I like hearing your voice. It's nice to see you, things like that. And some really good, some really good feedback too. Like, try to do some really short videos, make sure they're not too long, people asking for really specific topics, and it's been really nice. Got some advice on the camera angle. So I've been getting this feedback on how to do these and learning how to do them because I don't know, it's brand new to me. But I've also gotten some really challenging feedback, right? Like people, I've literally had a number of people say, guess what? I can't support you in your fundraising effort this year. I can't support you any longer because you're doing video blogs, and I'm sort of vehemently against video blogs. Or I've had some people actually say, I can't support you doing what you're doing with video blogs because I don't feel like you are a good speaker. You're a good writer, but you're not a good speaker. And so I'm withdrawing my Kickstarter support this year. So I've actually, like, the amount of feedback that I've gotten from doing this video blog has been really overwhelming, just totally overwhelming. But I had to like really dig in, right? Because after the solar eclipse in Leo last summer, I had a moment where I was like, I'm terrified of being on video in front of people. Like, video blogging is something I'd like to do, but I'm really scared of it. I'm not as natural a speaker, I don't feel, as I am a writer, or at least I can't communicate to the same level that I can in speaking as I do with my writing. But what is that going to so I'm just going to stay in my fear and just hang out there? I don't think so, right? If I was really feeling like spirit being like, hey, don't be afraid, just go for it. So that's why I started this video blog, not because I feel like I'm some master video blogger, but because I'd like to get better at it. And it's something that I'd like to incorporate into my offerings. So that's why I'm doing it, and I'm going to continue to do it. And I had to like get really, really real with myself about that. I had to be like, I don't care what, if some of my readers are going to stop listening because I'm doing blogs, or they're going to stop paying attention, they're not going to support me or whatever, like, you know what, at the end of the day, that's not my problem. So, but I had to have like a little bit of a Britney Spears moment. So I went ahead and I just decided to shave my head. I was like, you know what, Adam's just Adam. I'm just me. I had people telling me how to do my hair on the video. Literally people writing in saying, if you're going to do this, you really need to have your hair like this. You really need to have your hair like that. And I was taking it all so personally that I finally got fed up with myself and was like, look, I'm going to do this. I've got to kick the ego right at the door and just be comfortable with where I am. So just shave the head. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to start there, let you all know, just let you all know where I'm at with this. All right, so we're going to talk about Saturn now. In order to understand a planet like Saturn changing signs, you really have to understand a little bit more about the traditional view of signs in general. Signs were originally understood as the homes or temples of the planets. So they're literally seen as like the home of the gods. Planets themselves are also understood, especially in the Indian tradition, as emissaries of Godhead and sort of like administrators of cosmic law, fate, and karma. So you can think about it like that. Here you have these emissaries of the Godhead, emissaries of fate, destiny, karma, cosmic law, and they each have their own homes. Every planet except for the sun and the moon each have two temples in the zodiac. One is a masculine temple and one is a feminine temple. And if you want, you could think about those as yin or yang as well. So think about that first. Next, you have to remember that planets are not always in their own temples. They're constantly traveling through each other's temples. When a planet is in another planet's temple, what it's doing is it's expressing itself in its own archetypal character through the lens of the planet whose home it is occupying. So you have to, all of that is really important to understand. In modern astrology, we place so much emphasis on signs. It would be like placing more emphasis on the interior of a garage than on the actual car that you put in and out of the garage, right? So you really have to think about signs as the homes of the gods. And the gods are actually the most important players. So when we have had Saturn in Sagittarius for like 2.5 going on 3 years, the best way to think about it, in my opinion, and in my practice, this is how I teach my students to think about it, is that Saturn moving through Sagittarius is that Saturn has been hanging out in Jupiter's temple for like 2.5 to 3 years. So Saturn's being Saturn, but Saturn is expressing himself through the fiery, masculine abode of Jupiter. So what does it look like over 2.5 or 3 years when Saturn's hanging out in this super masculine Jupiter fireplace, right? It looks like what we've seen in political news for 2.5, 3 years, right? Let's talk about some of the political candidates we saw. Bernie Sanders. Here's an old, cantankerous, fiery, passionate old man, very Saturn, but expressing really progressive, sort of expansive political values, Jupiter. On the other hand, you have someone like Donald Trump, who has the same paradox, sort of the same contradiction or tension between planetary energies wrapped up in his expression. At least that's how we're experiencing it. He looks like the eternal youth, Jupiter. He sort of has this I can't grow up kind of Peter Pan quality to him. And yet he is also the epitome of like ultra conservative, sort of rigid, like sort of outdated Saturnine values. So we've seen also extreme progressives acting like extreme conservatives, and we've seen extreme conservatives acting in some ways like the rebellious, youthful, spirited, Jupiters. So we've, that kind of tension has been going on. That's Saturn hanging out in this fiery masculine Jupiter sign for like 2.5 years. We've been talking about truth, questioning truth. What is real? What is not real? All of that is also due to the fact that Saturn is not only in a temple with Jupiter, where the question of truth is a big deal because Jupiter's interested in truth and philosophy and values and beliefs, and so we're questioning them. But Saturn's also been in this long-standing square with Neptune, so that kind of complicates the whole thing and brings in the element of what truth can be trusted, what dogma can be trusted, anything. There's so much hot air, right? In Saturn and Sagittarius, there's been a lot of like hot air. And it's been like, it's not just been hot air, but it's been like, like hot air and like wildfires. You know what I mean? Like wildfires are you scroll through your Facebook feed the last 2.5, 3 years, and it's been a wildfire. Turn on the news, it's been a wildfire. Look at nature, it's been a wildfire. It's been intense and passionate and convicted, and you're not sure who's actually more conservative or rigid, people on the left or people on the right. It's just, the circle going farther to either end ends up meeting again on the other side. And that's the kind of paradox of Saturn in Jupiter's sign. In fact, traditionally, for a couple of, at least a number of centuries during the medieval era, Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions were thought to be important and pivotal sort of rebirth moments for an entire civilization. When Jupiter and Saturn came together, the young and the old, the new vision, the young prince and the old king are sort of coming together. It's not quite that way, but we have been in a Jupiter-Saturn flavored period with Saturn and Sagittarius. And so generational issues, you have Make America Great Again, right? But the vision that of the inaugural speech is one of total devastation and darkness, and we're returning to this golden age, and that's all Saturn as well. Saturn is the ruler of the golden age. Saturn is also a deity who gets usurped by his own son and thrown out of power, and he becomes the sort of rotten, miserable tyrant who was once the king of the golden age but is now nothing. All of that is wrapped up in what we've been dealing with, right? So you have this interesting blend of like, what happened to our country? We had such a nice, everything was going so well. Now we've fallen out of this golden era, and we must get back at all costs. And then you have that on the left and the right. People are feeling that on the left and the right now. And as hard as it is to sort of step into a little bit of a more Zen perspective, as much as it can feel like stepping into that Zen perspective is going to take you out of caring or fighting for the right side or whatever, it's important to actually take up that sort of bigger perspective. It's important because any and every planetary transit is an opportunity to get seized and lost. The planets in the Indian tradition are called grahas, which literally means grabbers. Carl Jung, James Hillman, many very brilliant archetypal, Liz Green, really brilliant archetypal psychologists and astrologers have told us that planets work in the consciousness, our individual consciousness and the collective consciousness, like that. They grab us, they seize us, and then we think, I'm passionate about this or that, I'm doing this or I'm doing that. And it's actually that the planet has us on puppet strings. And the planet is actually the one orchestrating our attitudes and behaviors and our spouting offs on Facebook and our whatever it is that we get really wrapped up in so frequently. It's not even really us. We become lived by powers that we pretend to understand. That's a quote that Hillman liked to use a lot. But that's sort of what's been happening with Saturn and Sagittarius on a certain level. We've been possessed by very rigid, intense beliefs and convictions, blowing a lot of hot air and thinking all the time, I'm a passionate person. It's not that we are or are not, in a sense, a passionate person, right? But what happens when we take up that perspective where it's like, yeah, and I'm also an eternal being who's just occupying this body for a brief period of time. I've occupied others. I'll occupy more to come. And when we recognize that, we get a little bit more distance from the power of the archetype that's seizing or grabbing us. And that's all we want, is a little bit more distance. We're not trying to say, oh, the planets are evil, Saturn and Sagittarius, I'm going to just sit and meditate and not participate in any of it. But how could you possibly participate? How could you possibly have a conscious relationship with an archetype unless you're able to see it in all of its multidimensionality and what it's doing and how it's acting and behaving in the world? So we have to have some distance from these transits. Okay, now Saturn is leaving this fiery masculine sign, and now Saturn is entering its feminine earth sign. So first of all, there's not just one Saturn. There's many Saturns, right? There's many, archetypes are multivalent, they're multidimensional. So Saturn is a woman. Saturn in Capricorn especially is a woman. You can think of it that way. Saturn in Capricorn is entering its feminine earth sign. So it's leaving Zeus's garage, hanging out with all of his like hot Ferraris, and Saturn is going to enter into his feminine home, earthy home, sea goat home. The sea goat, the constellation image of the sea goat, was called enigmatic. It was actually called the goat-horned one, or sometimes literally was just referred to as the goat-horned ? Very enigmatic, mythical sign. In modern astrology, we think of all of the signs as mythical because we've been like really programmed by, sort of modern archetypal, depth psychology, which encourages us to think about things mythically, all of which is really great. But it turns out that there were only two signs that ancient astrologers referred to as mythic, Sagittarius and Capricorn, because they included mythical beasts in the image. Capricorn is a mythical, sort of feminine, mysterious creature. Some really interesting mythology related to the actual constellation of Capricorn, which I'm not going to go into right now, but just pause for a minute, because sometimes you're going to see, probably in social media land, you'll see a lot of people say, Capricorn is this super, patriarchal, conservative, like fuddy-duddy, kind of sign. And that is so far from the truth. First thing to remember is that Capricorn is a maternal and matriarchal and feminine sign. I really want to emphasize those things. Maybe that's a little controversial for some people, but you really have to throw out this idea of Capricorn as patriarchal, masculine, conservative, and rigid. Those keywords are actually the rigid ones, right? The actual, if you really get to know Capricorn, it turns out the Capricorn is much more multidimensional than that. And also remember, even backtrack and keep myself accountable to my own words here. It's not even so much that Capricorn is anything, as much as it is that we're trying to understand certain characteristics and qualities of Saturn. There's not just one Saturn. This is a particular kind of Saturn, and Saturn's particular kind of feminine home. Understanding all of that, we're really still trying to keep our focus on how is Saturn going to be behaving. So let's talk about the Earth. The Earth is uneven. Your ground, you barely ever, when you go out in nature, do you find like level geometric plots, squares, shapes that are perfect. You don't find that. That's Jupiter's territory. That's the realm of air and fire. That's a masculine space. That's rational and even and smooth and well-defined, and the shapes are all perfect. And there's, and how is our society organized, right? Our society is organized in cubes, right? You got cul-de-sacs and plots of land and square houses with rectangular foundations. You get what I'm saying. That does not belong to Earth. The element of Earth, people always say it's so structured and practical and da-da-da, and then they start bringing in an almost kind of geometric attitude to Earth. And Earth isn't like that. The element of Earth is uneven. You go and walk on the Earth, and you'll find that your feet, your natural movement on the Earth, your body and the way it's framed is always taking into account unevenness. And that's how we're born in the world. In the material world, we're born and things are uneven. Some people are born fast, some people are slow. I've said this before in other things that I've written and spoken on in the video blogs. It's an uneven world that we live in. On the spiritual plane, there's lots of perfect circles. We're all equal spirit souls. We're all like little particles of God or something like that. But in the material world, that's not our experience, right? Our experience is, I like your video, it's too long. Your hair should be like this. Your camera view should be like that. Opinions, right? Unevenness, uneven ground, tons of opinions, lots of unfairness, and that's the material world. The first thing that Saturn in Capricorn, I believe, is really encouraging us to do is to get really real. And by real, we don't mean stern, strict, like some kind of nasty, chastising cosmic judge that's coming down and measuring your worth on a spiritual level. No, definitely not that. What we're talking about when we say get real is to recognize that nature is uneven, that it's rugged, that it's competitive, that it's organic, that it's cyclical, that it's dangerous, that it's beautiful, that it's fierce, that it features constant struggling in order to live and experience beauty, that beauty and struggle are in a conversation like constantly, that it's impermanent, that nothing here lasts, that it's always moving and changing shape and form. This is Earth. This is the actual archetypal meaning of the element of Earth, and it's deeply feminine. So when you see the world and you say, God, it's such a it's such a, like, you look at the world and you say, God, I'm so disgusted with it. Like how ruthless is it? Yeah, but that's Earth. That's Earth, and it's also a part of what makes it beautiful. So in most of the moksha traditions, liberation-based traditions, meaning the idea that the soul has an intricate, challenging relationship with the body, and that we're trying to figure out how to be liberated, basically, from the potential ensnarement and entrapment in the material world of the body. Most mystical traditions are interested in that. the first noble truth of most mystical traditions, including the Buddha himself, born a Taurus, an earthy sun sign. The first noble truth is to look at the world and see it for what it is. It's beautiful and fierce. It's competitive and uneven. It's filled with shitty people competing for power and wonderful people propping each other up with love and support. That's how it is. It's got all of it. It's all there. You look at it as it is, stripped free from your beliefs about it. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not this, it's not that. It's just, it includes patriarchy, it includes matriarchy, it includes the devastation of nature by nature. That's something that we also think. We think it's really, really unnatural for people to be doing what they're doing to the environment, right? Oh my God, Saturn and Capricorn's, I think Saturn and Capricorn's honest opinion is, it is awful, but it's also natural, because there's nothing that isn't natural in this material world. In fact, waves and tsunamis and lightning will strike and kill and devastate things frequently. Human beings kill and eat one another frequently. Animals kill and eat one another frequently. There is competition in every facet of the material world. And there is also peace and bliss and harmony. It's all there. There's nothing that's not there in this material space. All dualities are here. So Capricorn doesn't want us to take that and derive a belief from it. Saturn in Capricorn is not going to be the planet that says, so build some elaborate metaphysical, etc. What did the Buddha do with that noble truth, that observation of nature being like this? He basically shut up and started sitting under a tree, right? Like, just to be sort of crude about it, like he sat down and just started meditating. And he went to the extremes. He tried to renounce it all. That wasn't going to work. He was in the full opulence of palace life. That also was not going to work. When Saturn and Capricorn asks us to do spiritual work, what Saturn and Capricorn is asking us to do is to live our spirituality in the actual way that things are. Not trying to make them more than they are, not getting lost in material reality, but also not kidding ourselves that we can just sit around and reject it, that we're somehow above it or beyond it. So sometimes people say Saturn and Capricorn is very conservative. We have to think about what conservative means, right? Conservative is one of those words that also becomes stripped of its actual imaginative depth. Conservative comes from the word conserve. And to conserve is not a bad thing. Many of us consider ourselves conservationists in nature. And the word conserve obviously has a lot of really healthy meanings. When we want to conserve something that is idealistic, when we're trying to conserve something that is not rooted in a healthy and natural understanding about the cycles, the flow of life, the dualities of life, and we're trying to preserve and hold and maintain something ideological that is not rooted in the way that things actually are. That's what's meant by the sort of evil, dark version of the word conservatism. Like when someone's really, you say, oh, he's a conservative, and you're like, ugh. What we're usually saying is that they're trying to conserve some kind of fantasy image that is not in touch with the nature of change and the way that the world is, or something like that. But it's possible to be a conservative progressive who also believes that we should be living in utopia and that wants to conserve a fantasy of a perfect world. So again, usually when we're talking about conservative, we're talking about Jupiter, not Saturn. When we talk about being conservative and dogmatic, that's Sagittarius for sure, not so much Capricorn. And that's something that people really don't understand in astrology, at least as I observe it. So what does conservative look like when we have this sort of natural, realistic sort of Saturnine view? Well, sometimes Saturn is called the Lord of Karma. This is a good segue for understanding a healthy version of conservative. There's no escaping this material world that we're in. As long as we're in a body, we're here. We got to deal with all of the dualities. And yet, our actions matter and they have consequences. And Saturn in Capricorn can be something that really gives us raw, unfiltered, non-dogmatic, non-ideological feedback. This is just the way it is. These are your actions. This is the consequences they led to. It has nothing to do with whether you're a good person or not. It has nothing to do with whether your beliefs, sound right or not. It literally can be as simple as cause and effect. And then in this sort of very natural and organic understanding of who you are and your actions in the world, it is sort of unsympathetic on one level. It feels sort of like cold. However, it's really important to understand that though this is a winter sign, the winter solstice sign, this is also about the return of light. And what's really paradoxical about Saturn in Capricorn is that even though there's a kind of taskmaster, lord of karma, really just sort of showing you the bare bones of your actions and the consequences in the world, that understanding liberates us from the confusion and delusions of false beliefs about the way we are, about the way our actions are, about the way we believe in the world. So there's something really liberating that can, we can build a new platform and a new foundation for spiritual growth in our lives when we're able to see actions and consequences in a sort of unfiltered way, unmediated by all of our beliefs about our actions and about the world. Now, how does this lead back to this idea of conservation or conservatism, like a healthy conservatism? Well, let's say that we look at this on the collective level. Let's just say that the world starts getting, which we're due for, we know, we're due for a little bit more of an environmental reckoning. It's already here, it's coming, it's increasing though, we can't avoid it. Uranus is also going to be entering the fixed earth sign of Taurus. So we're really, I think with Saturn and Uranus entering earth signs, we're about to see nature for what it is. It's not going to care about our telephone wires. It's not going to care about our internet. You know what I mean? Like, just like, Puerto Rico, what happened in Puerto Rico, right, was, so many people was totally devastated. And yet somehow a cloud of ideology and politics is able to delude people, or in the case of the president's able to delude himself into not seeing the basic, primitive, natural reality of this, this devastating event that occurred. So like beliefs can sort of cloud it. Well, I don't think that's going to be as easy with Saturn in Capricorn and Uranus entering Taurus. Just the earthy reality of those things. What happens, just rhetorically, like what happens if Lower Manhattan floods again? What happens if it's worse? What happens if we see 4 or 5 more hurricane seasons in a row like the one we just had, right? At some point, the scales are going to tip, right? And that's just part of the material world. The scales tip. And when you're actually faced with, like, your neighbors are Republican and ideologically you have real differences, but when their house is flooded, it doesn't matter. Right? And that's what everybody says around the world when natural disasters occur. It doesn't matter who these people are or what they believe. The basic, practical, natural reality takes over. You're an animal, you need food, you need shelter, like this kind of stuff just kicks in. That's what conservative energy actually looks like. When conservative, taskmaster, lord of karma, Saturn comes in, it's not about harsh and cold punishments. It's about bringing us back to simple observations about nature. And those can be sobering on one level. It'd be like a karmic reaping. But on another level, it's like the measuring stick is a lot simpler. It's not, you no longer are measuring the effectiveness of something in your life or your love or loyalty for something based on, how charismatic it is, how many likes it gets, how filled with that sort of Jupiterian confidence it is. No. With Saturn in a feminine earth sign, it's more like, is the water poisoned? What do we do to fix the water? Because regardless of all of the stuff we're doing up here, that's the earthy reality. And that's an enlightening reality. It's not just some kind of functional, practical thing, right? So that's a good way of thinking about what does conservative actually look like. It looks like getting back to the roots, getting back to being an animal. And that's not a bad thing. That's an enlightening thing. In fact, the word nirvana actually means the cessation of flow, or it means basically getting out of the forest. You can't get out of the forest unless you recognize that you're in a forest, right? So the forest is a crucial and necessary part of enlightenment. You have to actually see the forest. And once you see the forest for what it is, then you're able to see through it into eternity. But so long as we're deluding ourselves about the way that things actually are in our lives, we stand no chance to see the forest for what it is. So we can't get to nirvana. We can't get out of being lost in the forest if we don't even know that we're in one. And that's what this transit is also going to be about, in my opinion. So that's what I have for everybody today. I thank you very much for all being here. I thank you for your feedback, and I'm also very happy to sort of not care about some of it. So if you're going to write me feedback, this is new to me. So just remember, I'm a human. I'm learning. I'm trying something new. It's scary for me. If you keep going, I will shave my eyebrows, and I'll also keep doing my best. So, so thank you guys, and have a beautiful day today, and see you around midnight tonight. Light a little candle and say a prayer, and ask Saturn to be your teacher. Ask Saturn to be kind, and ask Saturn to help you come back into your animal body, and really trust this transitional moment in your life with all of your heart. So that's what I'll be trying to do too. You guys have a great day. Have a great day.